There is no benefit to saying no comment. Number one, the words no comment are reportable and they look bad either on TV, on the radio, or in print. They don't look good. When asked for comment, so-and-so said no comment. That doesn't make so-and-so look very good. So that's first of all. Second of all, by declining to comment, you are offering no comment. And so it's better to decline to comment and not participate in anything than saying the words no comment. And number three, hopefully, depending on the scenario, you have a better answer than declining to comment. Now,
media training is not a very typical or normal job. How did you get about getting into it?
thank you for having me, Joe. I'm really excited for the conversation. So, yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated by media and journalists and journalism. How do they get stories? What are the rules of on and off the record? How does media make money? How do they very oftentimes lose money? What's the business of media, and what is the kind of, how does a newsroom work? That stuff to me, ever since I was probably in university or in high school, it's fascinating. I love that stuff. But I didn't want to be a journalist. I think journalists are insanely important to our society. I put them up there with like doctors and nurses and policemen and firefighters. Like, I think that they're fundamental to any kind of society. But I didn't want to be one, number one, because I don't think they get treated very well, unfortunately. And number two, I have a bit of a business mind. I like thinking about business, and I like kind of thinking through things in that kind of lens. And so, to me, the way that I was able to merge those two is to work in public relations and in media relations. That's kind of, you can be around journalists, but you're not one, right? You can be around newsrooms, but you're not in one. I've always wanted that. And so that's kind of how I started my career. After university, I interned in public affairs, actually with the United States, with the US State Department. And then from there, I worked in an agency for about 5 years. 4.5. I had clients all around, a variety of sectors: tech companies, real estate, natural resources, events, nonprofits, you name it. I kind of started at the bottom, and I kind of worked my way up to kind of, middle management, if you will, of that company. And that's the stuff that I just really am interested in and know, pretty well, I think. And so when it was time for me to start my own business and start creating content, what can I talk about day and night? Well, day and night, I'm fascinated by media. I'm fascinated by the way business people can give interviews, how they can do it better, the mistakes that they're making, how do you take a difficult question and answer it really smoothly? How do you not get canceled? How do you anticipate the issues that are going to come up when you're talking to the press? That stuff to me is fascinating. And so I decided to start a business around that.
So your clients are coming to you, businesses, tech startups you've mentioned there, and they're asking you to solve a problem. What problem are you solving for them?
So it could be one of two problems is kind of how I look at it. One is help me get into the news, right? Help me get PR, help me get a coverage so that so that I can raise awareness of my company. And hopefully that'll down the road lead to customers or partnerships or government endorsements or whatever, right? Get me press coverage so that it helps grow my business. That's kind of problem one. And problem two is when I'm talking to the press or when I'm in an interview or when I'm talking to a journalist off the record or whatever, how do I do it so that I come off as effective and as confident and I just look and feel as good as possible so that people, because it's a high stakes environment, right? Everybody's watching, everybody's reading, everybody's listening. How do I come off and how do I present my company in the best light possible? And I would also, I guess there's sometimes a third scenario, which is when they are in a crisis, when something has gone wrong, how do I protect how do I protect my company's reputation as best as possible? And how do I ensure that whatever reputational damage might have taken place so far, I'm not making it worse and we get out of this crisis as quickly as possible? I would say it kind of falls into one of those three buckets.
What percentage of it is dark art and what percentage is science? So is there a basic formula of if you get featured in the New York Times, you'll see X percentage on your revenue increase? Or is it more of a just get featured in as many places as possible?
Yeah, I couldn't give you a percentage number because number one, it's going to differ outlet by outlet. Number two, it's going to differ brand by brand. And number three, it's going to differ situation by situation. Are you on the front page of the New York Times? Are you on the last page of, some small blog? Is your buyer, what are they reading? What do they care about? The audience that you're trying to attract, where are they? Where are they spending their time? Where are they consuming their information? So there's not a science. Look, I wouldn't say that it's get as much coverage as possible. I think it's get as much coverage as possible when that coverage makes sense for you and it's hitting the right target audience. So everybody wants to be in the New York Times and in the Wall Street Journal. And I love that. And there's nothing like it. Don't get me wrong. I love that feeling. However, maybe your buyer isn't reading the New York Times. Maybe your buyer is sitting and reading some tech blog that gets 1,000 readers a month, but they're high engaged, they've got money, they're interested in what you're talking about. Maybe that's where you need to be. And so every organization, it's going to have different parameters for what a successful media placement is going to look like. And every situation is going to have different parameters, right? I worked in the real estate space, and, sometimes, we were always taught when we were at the agency that there's nothing like local press. And yeah, it's not as flashy, it's not as sexy, but who are the people who are buying and selling homes? Well, they're the people who are sitting and reading and watching local news. And so in that scenario, that's much more valuable than getting the New York Times.
How are you, or how were you able to curate and cultivate a relationship with the media in order to act as a point person for your clients? Is that just through years of being in the industry, or are you constantly on a connection web, reaching out to as many people as possible?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of things. So first of all, as a PR person, if you're trying to get your clients in the news, you are doing a ton of cold outreach. The skill that a PR person typically has that other people kind of typically don't is we are able to see very clearly what makes for a good story that the media will care about. That is what I am constantly thinking about. When I'm thinking about taking on a client, I think to myself, okay, what's the angle here that a journalist or that a newsroom would care about? And so that's what I'm always thinking about. And that's what I'm always pitching to a reporter. And so ultimately, how do I develop a relationship with them? They know that when an email comes from me, it's typically the story has been vetted. The notion of the story has been vetted. Now, maybe they're not going to say yes to that story because it doesn't fit into their timing, or they're busy, or they're focused on other priorities, or whatever. We absolutely do not bat 1,000. That a lot of pitches fail. But generally speaking, for the reporters that I've got a relationship with now, they know that when I'm coming to them, it's generally not with crap. They know that it's, you know what I mean? There's something there that I believe you can sink your teeth into. And based off of years of relationship and experience, there's generally something there.
One thing you spoke about is helping your clients, when speaking to a journalist off the record, be more confident and competent and certainly calm. How are you able to cultivate that for them when speaking to the journalist?
Yeah, so look, speaking to a reporter off the record is, I believe, a really important strategy, and that most clients and most non-PR people don't do, and it's to their detriment. When all you do is pitch a journalist and say, hey, feature me, feature me, feature me, feature me, that's a very transactional relationship, and journalists are people. They don't want that. And frankly, a lot of the best conversations for them, a lot of the time when they learn the most important stuff, that happens off the record, right? And so now there are rules of off the record. There are things that you should be doing and should not be doing, things that you should be saying and should not be saying. And I coach my clients so that they know those things and they go into those conversations eyes wide open. But if you want to develop a relationship with a journalist and have the journalist reach out to you so that when the moment comes that they're ready to write a story about something that you're an expert in, they think of you and not everybody else, the best thing that you can do is develop a relationship with that journalist. And one of the things that I think is really, really powerful in developing those relationships is off the record conversations.
So what is it that you're doing, though, to cultivate that relationship with the journalist with those off the record conversations? Is it a reach out on an email and saying, here's more context behind the scenes? What is it?
There's what I do, and then there's what I advise the clients to do. So let's kind of separate those two. When it's me, Number one, when I'm traveling to new cities, I reach out to journalists. Hey, let's grab a cup of coffee. Hey, let's catch up. Just like, you would in any kind of business development endeavor, right? Let's talk. That's number one. Number two, whenever I'm around them, I try my best to chat with them and get to know them as people. So I would, I don't do this a ton of in-person stuff because the world's so virtual and my clients are all around the world. But back, when I started, I spent a lot of time in person with journalists, with TV cameras as they're standing there, they're filming, they're interviewing. We're waiting for my client to come out of his office. The interview's outside or whatever. Or in the real estate example, okay, realtor is inside of a house, showing a house. I show up with a journalist and we're standing on the front porch waiting for that appointment to be finished so that he can be interviewed. Very common scenario. So what am I doing in that scenario? I'm sitting, I'm talking, I'm connecting. Hey, what's going on in your world? What stories are you guys looking for these days? What's happening in the newsroom? What did you think about this? What did you think about that? Politics in terms of, I advise my clients not to talk about politics, but hey, what did you guys think of the election yesterday? Whatever, off the record conversations, that's totally, totally valuable. And I'm just trying to really learn about them, ask them a lot of questions and let them feel connected to me. And so those are kind of some of the tactics that I lean on when I'm around reporters. When I'm advising my clients, it's a lot of the same. Maybe not quite to certain degree because they're not quite as comfortable in that scenario and they're worried that everything that they say is reportable, and it is. So I try to nudge them in that direction a little bit, but I find they're typically pretty buttoned up and they're careful about what they say, which they should be.
You mentioned not mentioning politics with your clients, and one thing that always ruins a good meal, as the saying goes, is any mention of football, politics, or religion. And that's something I disagree with completely because this podcast mentions all three on a regular basis. But are there any taboo topics which you just flat out never mention with your clients, or is it more of a case-by-case basis?
I would say that it's more of a case-by-case basis, but I do recommend that my clients stay away from political topics when they're giving on-the-record interviews. I think that we live in a very polarized society right now. You're either team red or team blue, and depending upon the country, that's either conservative or liberal. You don't want to alienate half your audience. And ultimately, once you get into the political world, you do end up alienating half your audience. And really, to what end? You know what I mean? What are you trying to accomplish? And so I really recommend when my clients are giving on-the-record interviews, stay away from politics. Generally, religion isn't something that gets brought up a ton. And sports is fair game. I think you can talk about sports all you want. The thing generally that I recommend my clients, though, is if you're doing an on-the-record interview, stay on topic. Talk about the thing that you are there to speak about. You are an expert in something, whatever that is. Keep the conversation there. That is to your benefit. Now, can you make an analogy about a football match or a basketball game or whatever to come off as likable and like you're somebody who has other interests besides your business? Yeah, you can. But generally, it's in your best interest to bring the conversation back to the thing that you are there to talk about.
What's your views on the phrase or outlook or strategy that there's no such thing as bad publicity? Because these polarizing topics that we talk about, some people will actually just use that as a lever to just maximize the amount of reach, views, clicks that they get.
Yeah, I don't agree with that saying. And by the way, all you have to do is look at what's happening with McDonald's right now and their E. coli outbreak. They're getting a ton of publicity. None of it's good. And so I don't subscribe to that theory. I think, look, if you're a unknown person and you're trying to become a celebrity, like a Kardashian or like a reality TV star of some sort, maybe I can see there being some validity in that. But I think that for the businesses that I work with, which are just businesses that are trying to grow and make money, maybe they're startups, maybe they're venture backed, maybe they're bootstrapped, whatever it is, maybe they're mid-market and are trying to get into the enterprise. And occasionally I've worked with enterprise clients of like publicly traded companies. There is absolutely such a thing as bad publicity. And it's not, I don't subscribe to that theory. Now, when you're small and nobody knows who you are you will need to take risks in your content and in your PR strategy because you need to get noticed. That's fine, but they need to be strategic risks. And there are absolutely ways where those risks can backfire. So you really need to be careful about what you're doing PR-wise.
When you get into a spot of bad publicity, one thing that you say in your videos and also advise clients is to never say no comment. Why is that?
Yeah, this is a video that has done pretty well, and I think it was because when I did it, I was talking about the TV show Succession, the HBO series, a very famous one, and just all the mistakes that one character or a few characters there actually are making. So look, there is no benefit to saying no comment. Number one, the words no comment are reportable and they look bad either on TV, on the radio, or in print. They don't look good. When asked for comment, so-and-so said no comment. That doesn't make so-and-so look very good. So that's first of all. Second of all, by declining to comment, you are offering no comment. And so it's better to decline to comment and not participate in anything than saying the words no comment. And number three, hopefully, depending on the scenario, you have a better answer than declining to comment. Now, sometimes, yeah, you don't want to get involved. It is absolutely a valid strategy to not respond to a particular media inquiry. 100% that is valid. And depending upon the scenario, you might not want to respond. But saying the words no comment is never in your best interest. And you just end up looking goofy. Like, that's it. You just look goofy and unprepared and nervous. It doesn't help you.
Speaking of being unprepared, though, what happens if you're accosted by a journalist and they ask you a direct question in which you don't know the answer? How do you manage a situation like that?
As part of an interview that you've already set up?
Both. We can have interview already set up and then in a very sort of structured environment, but also what happens if you're accosted on, say, the middle of the street as you're doing your shopping?
Yeah. So look, the people that I'm working with, they're generally not being accosted in the middle of the street. They're not, they're not Taylor Swift. The people who get accosted in the middle of the street are primarily celebrities. They're not even politicians because politicians are walking around with security, right? So they don't get accosted by anybody. Professional athletes rarely get accosted. The typically with athletes, there's an understanding between the club and the media that like what's cool and what's not cool. Where an athlete gets accosted is by a content creator or a person on Instagram or whatever. That's where an athlete can get accosted. So typically the people that I'm working with, which is business people, they're not like household names that are going to get accosted in the middle of the street. Now, if you don't know the answer to a question as part of an interview that you have set up, there is nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I don't know, I'll have to get back to you on that. I think a lot of times people get in trouble with the press when they start talking about things that they don't know and they start speculating. And one of the rules that I have when I'm giving a media training interview, media training session, is don't speculate on things that you don't know about. It's never in your best interest. And chances are you're going to go somewhere where you don't want to go. And so if you're not prepared for a question, there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I actually don't know the answer to that. Can I get back to you on that? And generally speaking, a reporter will accept that answer, especially if you get asked a question about a topic where you're not an expert in. Now, if you're getting asked about your business and, hey, what was your profit this year? And you don't know the answer to that, that's problematic. You need to prepare. You need to know the answers to those questions. But generally speaking, if there's something that you legitimately don't know the answer to and you have no reason to know the answer to that, it's okay for you to say, you know what, I don't really know. Let me get back to you on that. I don't want to speak out of turn.
You mentioned the agreement that media and sports teams will have about, you said what's cool and what's not. What goes on behind a sort of package like that?
In the world of professional sports, access is everything, right? And so ultimately, especially in today's world where the athlete, the superstar athlete, is such a bigger person than the journalist who's reporting on them, really. Typically, the clubs have all the control. The athletes and the clubs have all the control. And so what ends up happening is they say, okay, here's what you're allowed to do. Here's what you're not allowed to do. These are the times you're able to ask questions. These are the times you're not able to ask questions. And so reporters typically know the rules that they have to, the little sandbox that they have to play within, and they won't go outside of that, because ultimately a club can revoke access, and then you're hooped, right? So, yeah, generally speaking, the club sets the rules. I've never been in-house at a sports team, but when I work with reporters at events where events are coming, where reporters are coming and going, and there's questions of access and no access and whatever, I really do my best to try to give them as much access as possible within reason, so that they can tell the story they want to tell. I think it helps develop a relationship with that journalist, between the club, between the company and that journalist, and it also helps the journalist tell better stories. But the big football teams, they're getting coverage no matter what. You know what I mean? And so they know they have all the power.
From one end, we have the big football teams who have all of the power and get to dictate whatever they do, and the journalists are really at the beck and call of them. To the other end of, say, the startup with whom is your client, and they want to get into the news, they want to get that media coverage. What's the best, apart from hiring you, of course, what's the best way that they can do that?
That's a great question. There's a few steps. I mean, look, if I was giving this advice 10 years ago, it'd be different. But now that we're here are the few steps that I would say. Number one, start building on an audience. So you're doing a great job with this podcast, right? Same idea, is find some platform and start building an audience on that platform. The reason why the Wall Street Journal reaches out to me, or the reason why New York Magazine reached out to me, or even why you reached out to me, is because I got a little bit of an audience. There are thousands of people who have verified that I'm an expert in what I'm talking about, and they know that, yeah, this guy knows what's up and we can trust him. And so when a journalist wants to find an expert, where do they go? Well, they go searching on Instagram and they go searching on TikTok and they, depending on the topic, they find the expert that suits them. So number one, I would say start building an audience. Number two, start thinking about what type of stories you would want to be a part of. Start consuming news. This is one of the things that, like, a lot of people don't read the news anymore, and that's fine. But if you want to be in the news, you have to consume the news to understand what kind of stories are in vogue right now, and so so that you can fit yourself into those. And so start consuming news, and start thinking about what kind of stories you could be a part of. And then number three, start small. No matter the New York Times is kind of the top of the mountain, or the BBC or whatever, CNBC or whatever, all these kind of tier one publications, they're at the top of the media mountain. But you can start small, and there is some sort of local blog or publication or YouTube channel or whatever that is interested in what you have to say. You just have to find them and craft a story in the way that resonates with them.
You have a concept of the David versus Goliath when pitching a story. What is the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so media, one of the things that I do when I'm training is what makes for a good story when you're looking at it from the lens of a journalist. What do journalists and their audiences care about? And what they care about in a lot of scenarios is the classic hero's journey, right? Started with a problem, overcame obstacles, slayed the dragon, got the princess, right? Like, that's the kind of classic hero's journey. And so one of the things that is a part of that is the story of the underdog. Media and their audiences, they love underdogs. And so if you can position yourself as David in the fight against Goliath, all of a sudden you're going to get a lot more sympathy, and you're going to get a lot more interest from media. And you see big corporations do this as well. I mean, I did a video in the summer about how the CEO of McDonald's went and he was being interviewed on CNBC, I think it was, during the Paris Olympics, and he framed his corporation, which is the McDonald's, probably the world's biggest food corporation. He framed them as David, and he said, look, it's not one big McDonald's corporation. There's actually tens of thousands of small business owners who are our franchisees who own, and we're just trying to help them out. We're just trying to help out the little guy. And he just did a masterful job of framing his angle in that way. And so my advice to a lot of people, Apple does this too. We're just the rebels trying to fight against the boring PCs, right? Like, frame yourself as the little guy, David, in the fight against Goliath.
Speaking of Goliath, and certainly speaking of big corporations, one would instantly think of Forbes and their very famous 30 under 30s, all that sort of thing. Is very well known people up in their LinkedIn or Instagram bio if they are recipients of those awards. But you said in a video that it's basically all a scam. Why is that?
Yeah, those 30 under 30 and 40 under 40 and all those, it's crazy how much attention and interest that topic got when I posted about it. So look, let's zoom out. It's not just about Forbes 30 under 30, although they're certainly like the most famous one. Anytime you have these awards where it's 30 and 30, 40 and 40, or best entrepreneur of the year or person of the city or whatever, a lot of people don't know how they work. And so what a lot of people think happens is that these journalists who work at Forbes, they scour the internet or they scour your town and they figure out, okay, these are the 30 most interesting and influential people in our space, and we're going to write about them. We're going to reach out to them, or we're going to write about them, or maybe we're just going to do it secretly. No, that is not how it works. How it works is these are essentially publicity. I don't want to call them stunts, but let's use the word stunts. They are publicity tactics for the magazine to get attention and to get, to sell magazines and all that kind of stuff. And so what ends up happening is the successful candidates are often a company will hire somebody like me. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I know what it takes to get a win out of that in that scenario. I know what the judges are looking for. And so I write an application, and it's totally application based. You submit an application, I write the application for you. And I don't guarantee a win or anything like that, but I do pretty well. I know what the judges are looking for, and PR people typically know what the judges are looking for. And so if you're not being included in those 40 under 40 or 30 under 30 lists, please don't despair. It's not that your business isn't valid or isn't doing great or whatever. A lot of people get upset. Why wasn't, this guy was considered, my business is bigger than his. Why wasn't I considered? That has nothing to do with it. 99% certainty, he hired a guy like me who knows how to get the award. He knows how to write the application. And that's how he was able to win. And by the way, that's just the free one. There's also the paid ones, which are a total, scam is the wrong word, but they're totally not worth it. I never recommend that to my client. I get outlets reaching out all the time. You've been selected for top 10, such and such and such. All you have to do is pay $5,000. There's a lot of big publications do that. I really, really recommend for my clients not to waste their money on that.
Why is that? Just because you struggle to see the return on investment, or it signals different things about ethics?
No, it's not. It's a return on investment thing. Number one, typically these are smaller publications, and so they really don't have the audience. Number two, you could just spend that money so much more effectively. And by the way, I'm the first who loves PR and attention, media coverage, and being on the front page. I'm the first who loves it, but even I can't justify spending $5,000 on that kind of award. It's ridiculous.
Media leaks is something in which you've also spoken about. It happens a lot on all different levels of business, politics, especially sports teams. What's the inside of the situation of media leaks? Because it's something we all know happens. We all see it. We all read it. But what's actually happening on the other side of the fence?
Yeah, generally speaking, the simple answer is there is somebody whose interest it is to leak this information. There is somebody out there in your organization, or maybe it's a counterpart or whatever, they have information of some sort, and it's in their best interest for that leak to come out, whether they're pushing for change at a company, whether they're a political, it's a political maneuver, whatever. There are plenty of leaks that always happen. And so typically, whenever you hear about leaks, whenever I hear about leaks, my first instinct is to think, okay, who would leak this and why? What are they trying to push? Because leaks don't just happen out of the blue. Occasionally somebody slips up and they say the wrong thing to the wrong people and it gets passed on. But generally speaking, especially with organizations, whenever a reporter is a highly placed source or a person in the know, or according to someone senior at XYZ company, that's generally somebody intentionally leaking that. And so you can be strategic with those leaks. And oftentimes those leaks are, they have approval from the CEO or from the board or whatever. It's not an accident. They make it sound like an accident, but it's really a strategic move.
Are there any laws or anything to prevent leaks? Obviously, there's the ethics it would cause in, and certainly grounds for firing, I'm sure. But are there actually any written down laws if you cannot do X, Y, Z?
So first of all, laws are going to be different country to country. You're in the UK, I'm in Canada, so right away there's a difference there. America's a whole other kettle of fish. Um, there are going to be laws if you're leaking national security information in the US. I have to assume actually everywhere. You know, the Department of Defense, yeah, you can't really leak that kind of stuff, and if you do, you face federal charges. But if you're working in a corporation, they can't, like, I don't believe they can fire you, and there are repercussions, but I don't know that the government is going to step in and say you committed a crime here.
When someone is listening to this, they might think, okay, so I know I need to get my David and Goliath story. I need to reach out, either hire you or someone like you, or certainly start my own campaign to get featured on the news, and you will have armed them with all of the information and best practice on how to do that. But what happens if they do not feel confident or do not feel as though they're that good of an orator? That's very tricky when it comes to interviews, because they'll get nervous, they'll get panicked what they'll say, they'll stumble over words. How important has been a good communicator in this line of work?
I would say it's important, but it's not. There are ways around it, first of all, and second of all, you can always get better. So let's start with that. Actually, is you can get better. The thing that I really emphasize when I'm coaching somebody is, you know, you and I, we can spend hours together, and we can practice and we can train. But you know, just like when you're with a personal trainer at the gym, that's an hour. That's great. But you know, the next day when you're not with the personal trainer, you still need to go to the gym and practice the good habits that he or she taught you. And so I'm going to do my darndest to help you and make you better and make you feel more confident and give you the answers that are going to help you position yourself as best as possible. But ultimately, you know, take some time, go do your homework, go think about, I can't know your business the way you do. And so you need to take some time, think about what kind of questions you're going to get asked, right? Preparation is really important. Start to anticipate what are the topics that journalists are going to be interested in, right? What are they writing about these days? Practice your answers to another person, to your spouse or your kids, or in front of the mirror, whatever. You don't even need another person, but practice. So number one, you can get better on public speaking and oratory skills and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, there are clubs that you can join. I'm sure you've heard of Toastmasters. That's another club where it's more about speeches than media, but a lot of the principles are the same. And so, yeah, you can get better. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, to answer your question of if I got an interview tomorrow with the New York Times and I'm not feeling very good about my public speaking skills, well, a lot of times you can pick the medium that's best for you. So maybe you're not great at live television. Maybe all the cameras and the microphone in your face and the lights and whatever, maybe that's causing you stress. I get that. But then go to print or go to an online publication. Figure out the medium that's best for you, or maybe radio. Maybe doing a phone interview is your cup of tea. Podcasts like this, whatever. Pick the medium that you're comfortable with, and over time, what you're going to find is that you're going to start to get more and more comfortable with more and more different styles. And ultimately, repetition is your best friend. The people who are, you know, if you look at somebody like, and I try to stay away from politics, but if you look at somebody like Barack Obama, he is very comfortable doing any sort of media appearance, you know, that he gets put in front of. Why? It's because he's done 1,000 of them. And so, you know, yeah, get repetition and practice is your best friend.
Speaking of medium, do you find, or have you noticed any difference in the ambitions of your clients? So potentially, and certainly traditionally, there would be a sense of, I want to be on X paper or X magazine or X news station, X radio. But now there's a whole influx of social media, of podcasts, of this really like new media. Has that been represented in the ambitions of any of your clients, or do you see that more down the line as it potentially comes alongside or overtakes the traditional media?
Yeah. So, no, I definitely see it. Especially podcasts. A lot of the clients that I'm speaking to, they start asking me, okay, I want to get on to Tim Ferriss's podcast or Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett, or Mel Robbins, or nobody really asks for Joe Rogan because that's a whole other beast. That's a whole other kettle of fish. But yeah, no, generally speaking, podcasts have definitely emerged. Podcasts are different, right? Because they are long form, right? And so it's a more of a marathon than a sprint. But they're a little bit more relaxed. And so maybe you don't have to be quite so on guard about the things you say. Maybe with a podcast, it's less about gotcha journalism and tripping up. And it's more about how do you phrase your answers to be as interesting as possible? How do you keep people interested in what you're saying? Right. And so that's all about your speaking patterns and your vocal variety and, volume and all that kind of cadence and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, to answer your question, absolutely. Podcasts have emerged as definitely a style that people are interested in.
I know a guy who used to work at Microsoft, and his job at Microsoft was to be the media response team for the Western side of the world. So basically, if any bad PR story came up in the news that was on his clock, which was 12 hours of the day, he would be responsible for finding out what had gone wrong in the business of Microsoft and then going to the media and sort of explaining. And he basically said, when it comes to a crisis, it basically comes down to finding out what happened, and then you go to the media and just say, this is what happened, and if there's something wrong, then you just apologize. How bad of a strategy is that? Is it more complex? Is it more a case of you have to add context, or can you just admit when you've done something wrong and then move on?
Yeah, so that's a tough question to answer because there's going to be so much nuance depending on the company, depending on the spokesperson, depending on the legal situation, depending on what actually happened, what's the crisis that's taken place. So it's hard for me to say, is that a bad strategy or not? Generally speaking, when you have made some sort of egregious mistake, you want to recognize the mistake, apologize if you're actually sorry. Don't ever say, I'm sorry if I offended anyone or anything like that. Like, that's not. If you are actually feeling remorse and contrition, you need to, you want to apologize. You want to use the words, I'm sorry, or I apologize. Typically, I like it when the CEO or somebody in the senior level of the organization uses the word I instead of we as an organization. It's I apologize, I'm sorry. And then what you want to do is overcorrect to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And you want to be kind of vigilant to make sure that it doesn't happen over and over and over again. And so, look, that Microsoft scenario, I mean, Microsoft is a giant corporation, one of the biggest in the world. The nuances of I am sure that whoever you were speaking to has a very, very comprehensive, multi-layered, many different stakeholders strategy. And it's probably a little bit more complex than just what that sentence. But yeah, I mean, case by case, that might be the right strategy for you, depending on what your organization is and what's happened.
It's quite interesting, actually. You talk about apologizing, and certainly in today's age, we're all at risk or one step away from facing what can be described as a cancel culture mob. When you are under scrutiny, say from them or somewhere else, and you don't agree with the accusations which they've leveled at you, or you don't think you've done something wrong, or you haven't done something wrong, how do you manage a media situation like that?
It's a great question. So it's going to depend case by case. Generally speaking, look, if you feel like you've done nothing wrong, there is value and validity in standing up for yourself, and more importantly, helping the audience at home understand where you are coming from, right? So I'm assuming, especially with the clients that I'm working with, these are not bad actors. These are people who are genuinely trying to make a dent in the universe in whatever way they want, whether it's this business or that business, this politician or that politician. They believe that where they're coming from is a place of good. They're trying to help. Yeah, they're trying to make money, but they're also trying to help people, and they're trying to build some sort of an enterprise or whatever. Help the audience understand where you were coming from. Because once you do that, people are going to, you may not win everybody over, but they'll at least understand a little bit of like, oh, okay, I see that he had good intentions and he was trying to do this or he was trying to do that. Now, sometimes, yeah, not everybody's going to agree with it, but at least let them see, help them see behind the curtain a little bit about what you were trying to do. And so then tactically, what's the best way to explain that? Again, it depends case by case, but oftentimes this is one of the reasons why building your own audience is so valuable, is because you can use that that audience. You've already got people's attention, so when you go out and speak, you're able to speak to them directly, right? So sometimes that means putting out a video or a post on social media. You see celebrities do this a lot. Sometimes that means going to a journalist and speaking to them. Typically, I like to recommend pick one journalist, pick one outlet that you know is very reputable, very trusted, answer the questions, and then stick with that one and refer all other inquiries to that one journalist, right? Or to that one story or whatever. Hey, I've already addressed this. I'm not talking about this anymore. So there are different tactical ways that you can deal with that scenario. But generally, big picture, I like to let people inside to see where was I coming from? What was I trying to accomplish? Yes, I may have fallen short, but what was I trying to do?
One of the best PR glow-ups, if we could call it that, of the last few years has been Mark Zuckerberg. He went from a very poor reputation when he was hauled in front of Congress, and all of the connotations of the name Mark Zuckerberg were very negative. And then he sort of disappeared for a few years, and then he popped on the internet and it completely exploded as this freedom-loving, pseudo-hippie guy who it seems to be everyone's best friend. From a PR perspective, can you give us background into his story? Because I know it's something that you spoke with the Wall Street Journal about. And then also how they've managed to take him from villain to almost hero.
Yeah, that is probably one of it might be in the last 5-10 years the most impressive PR glow up that I have seen. And I follow a lot of people. And by the way, people have gone downhill, but he's one that's really, really come up uphill in a very, very impressive way. Which isn't to say that everything he does is right, and it isn't to say that everything I agree with. But generally speaking, it's quite impressive how much his reputation has really gone in the right direction. So look, I think fundamentally what I think he's done is he's leaned into authenticity. I think he said, look, I know that when I was younger, I was a bit of a nerdy, robotic guy. And I think my guess, this is Eddie's guess, is that he had a bunch of PR people telling him, don't say this, don't say that, don't say this, don't say that. They were telling him all the things that he should not do. And what ends up happening is, when you can't go anywhere with your personality, you end up being quite robotic. And for him, I think there was a moment, something happened, around 2020, maybe-ish, around that time, where he kind of decided, you know what, screw this. I'm going to be myself. And in that authenticity, he was able to really shine. And so I think that he said, you know what am I? I'm a coder. I'm a business person. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm interested in fashion. I'm interested in this. I'm interested in that. This is my personality. The robotic thing didn't work for me. Let's try this now. This is who I am. And I think that authenticity has really allowed him to come out of his shell and has allowed people to really like him. He kind of set his kind of placed his flag and he said, this is who I am. You can love me or you can hate me. And when you're that confident about who you are and you're not trying to hide behind anything, that in and of itself, that energy is attractive. And so people gravitate towards that energy. And by the way, the beauty of it is it helps his business too, because as he's trying to recruit, and I talked about this in that interview, as he's trying to recruit more and more young people and AI engineers and Gen Zs and recent graduates and all that kind of stuff, what resonates with them? All of the signals that he's been sending out lately. So I think it's been a really, really strategic move on his part. Listen, when your stock is doing as well as his has done over the last 2-3 years, you can afford to do that. The shareholders will allow it, but yeah, it's been really fascinating to watch.
Terrific. Eddie, what can we expect from you going forward apart from more insightful and interesting videos and all that goes on?
Yeah, and thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, I'm going to keep creating content. I love it. I love finding little nuggets of what people are saying in interviews and and when business people are speaking to the press and little opportunities to optimize, I think that's fascinating. Yeah, I work with a few clients. If anybody's interested in getting media training, I'd be happy to have a conversation. And I'm really a believer that all of the world of PR, people can do it themselves. They don't have to hire a big PR agency and spend tens of thousands of dollars a month on that. And so I'm going to be coming out with some different programs in the next few months about how you can do it yourself and how all the different ways that you can get the press coverage, protect your reputation, communicate as best as possible. So stay tuned for that. And but in the meantime, everybody who's interested in this kind of stuff, I'd love a follow.
Great. And all of that will be linked in the show notes below. Eddie, thank you so much for your time. You've been insightful and entertaining. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe.